It's true to say that many of us lead busy and demanding lives in which we find it difficult to put aside any time to sit down and meditate. Or the experience is that even if we do find the time, our minds are in a state of agitation with mechanical thoughts about what happened yesterday, or what's happening today, or what will happen tomorrow, whirring round and round in circles in the windmills of our minds. Some of us will recognize that the minute we sit down to meditate, we drift off into a dream and cannot concentrate for any length of time. And this in turn may cause us to lose sight of the whole point of meditation. In the words spoken in The Tempest by Prospero the magician, we are such stuff as dreams are made on, and our little lives are rounded with a sleep. And it may be useful to put it to ourselves. Do I want to continue living in this dream world, however cozy or uncomfortable it may be? Or do I wish to wake up? Of course, there can be many contributing factors to this state of mind, such as our general health and well-being, plus other known and unknown karmic influences and forces. But let us be courageous, and this is a key phrase. Let us be courageous and take a step beyond the superficial layers of the mind and delve more deeply into the core reasons for why it's much more than useful to maintain its practice. There are a number of definitions which can be found on meditation, but keeping in line with this talk, I will quote it as defined by Madame HP Blavatsky, co-founder of the Theosophical Society. HPB, as she is known, states that a practice to attain a state of abstraction which carries the ascetic practicing it far above this plane of sensuous perception and out of the world of matter. She then states that for instruction in practical occultism, it is necessary to have acquired power of concentration and then to receive definite directions. The latter would be of little use to a student who has not already attained the power of concentrating his mind and will. This power should be cultivated and trained, and it is to this end that the rule ordering daily meditation was laid down. She continues, there is no other way of attaining the power of concentration, and without this power largely developed, no progress can be made. No beginning even of it being possible. Now, if this all sounds a little bit beyond our current scope of attainment, HPB then reassures us that any virtuous man can reach Nidror Nomsum, I hope I pronounced that correctly, meditation by self-perception. I'll say that phrase again. Meditation by self-perception. The intuitive comprehension of the four truths without either belonging to a monastic order or having been initiated. These four noble truths are defined as the truth of suffering, the truth of the cause of suffering, the truth of the end of suffering, and the truth of the path that leads to the end of suffering. More simply put, she says, suffering exists. It has a cause, it has an end, and it has a cause to bring about its end, which is important. With regard to concentration, the Blessed Master Kutumi writes, the great difficulty to be overcome is the registration of the knowledge of the higher self on the physical plane. To accomplish this, the physical brain must be made an entire blank to all but higher consciousness. When the brain is thus rendered a blank, An impression from the heart may reach it and be retained. So, now let us take a step back in time to 1887 and refer to the direction that aspiring theosophists received from Madame Blavatsky when she produced an outline on meditation. This was first introduced to the members of her inner circle of followers. It was simply entitled The Diagram of Meditation, which you will now be able to view on your screens. In a YouTube presentation given in 1992 on the diagram of meditation by distinguished American theosophist and Professor Emeritus John Algeo, he reminds us and his viewers that Madame Blavatsky published her magnus opus, The Secret Doctrine, in 1888, to proclaim the unity of all existence. To proclaim the unity of all existence. And it is no coincidence that this famous diagram was introduced at about the same time. The professor begins by reading the words at the very top of the diagram. First, conceive of unity. First, conceive of unity. He then suggests that the meaning of conceive is to become pregnant with, to imagine. And he suggests that both meanings are implicit in this diagram. That is, that unity has to be born in us, that we have to conceive unity so that it becomes a living thing inside of us, like a child inside the womb. He explains, it is about creating this seed of unity within us and fostering it. Professor then continues as he refers again to the diagram. First, conceive of unity by expansion of space and infinite in time. He describes this expansion as filling out, filling up, completing, filling in all space. And he describes space and time as the warp and woof in which we live, infinite in time. He says, HBB is introducing here a theme which runs through the entire diagram, echoing again and again, a kind of balance of opposites. He says that expansion means to grow bigger, to grow outwards. But he describes infinite as a negation in the sense of something which is not finite, that infinity is not endless time. It is not just time that's going on forever, because if it goes on forever, you've got to keep trying and reaching it because it goes on forever. But here, there are no limits. He then elaborates by giving the explanation that both positive and negative themes are going to run through this. And he gives an example of how this can be seen in the Kabbalah. He says, one of the names of the Absolute in the Kabbalah is Ein, and Ein means nothing. I don't know if I pronounced that correctly. It could be Ayin, but I'll say Ein. And the other name is Ein Sof, which means not limited, without limits. Two forms of the same meaning, both the void and the fullness. Ein Sof Or means unlimited light. And as soon as you say that, it means that the Absolute is both nothing and everything. And he points out that this idea also runs through the diagram. In relation to this great expansion, Professor Algeo mentions that some of us may be familiar, mentions that the game some of us may be familiar with playing when we were children. Consider yourself sitting in this room, in this building, in this state, in this country, on this planet, in this solar system, in this galaxy, in this mega galaxy, and so on. Then he asks us rhetorically, so where does all this lead? And the answer is, it doesn't stop. And that is the point, that you can go on and on. There is no end to it. And all that remains is the oneness, or as HPB would put it, the concept of unity. Professor then says, you can consider the same process with time. This moment, this day, this week, this month, this year, this lifetime, and so on. He then highlights that HPB stated, we can think of the universe as an impersonal thing, extending in space and time. Or we can think of ourselves as a part of that extending in space and time. And that, she said, makes no difference. He points out that she's saying something very profound here, which is, I am in the universe, but the universe is also in me. And I'll say that again. I am in the universe, but the universe is also in me. And later on in the talk, we're going to come back to that statement. But the professor continues, these are two ways of looking at the same thing, which are, the event is one, that part of the Theosophical teaching is that we never, in fact, lose our identity. We never cease to exist, and rather we discover who we really are. He then says that meditation begins when thinking stops. But he suggests that HPB is asking us first to think about it, and then to meditate logically and consistently in reference to the states of consciousness. The professor then elaborates on these states of consciousness. He says, the common view at that time was that Westerners believed there was only one state of consciousness. Either you were conscious or you were unconscious. But, he relates, at about that time, Freud came along and said that we can call that the unconscious, but it is really not unconscious at all. And that there are things going on there all the time which can affect our conscious minds. Professor Algeo then points out, it affects the way we think and act and our attitude towards things. So, the professor says, there are now two stages, and he relates that at this point, Carl Jung came along and stated that the unconscious is more complex than that. There is the personal unconscious, which is all that Freud dealt with, and which included things we have forgotten or repressed. But, he said, Jung noticed things which didn't happen just to individuals, but which were common in individual after individual. The professor explains, there were symbols which Jung referred to as archetypes, and he called this the collective unconscious. So now, in the Western world, we had three stages: the normal conscious state, the personal conscious state, and the collective unconscious state. He continues, then people began to talk about a fourth kind of state, which was referred to as cosmic consciousness or superconsciousness. He then referred to a book by R. Bucks, which came out at about that time, entitled Cosmic Consciousness, A Study of the Evolution of the Human Mind, which gave accounts where individuals have a taste of what this is like, and we will hear more about that later. He says that there is only a single harmonious unit. You are the trees, the wind, and the stars, all at once, an experience above and beyond our normal awareness. The professor then says that these four states of consciousness are described in the Mandukya Upanishad. In the Mandukya, they are known as the waking state, the dream state, and the deep sleep state. The fourth state is described, among other things, as uninferable, unthinkable, indescribable, in which all phenomena cease, and which is unchanging, auspicious, and non-dual. That is the self, and that is to be known. The fourth state, he tells us, is the essence of the knowledge of the one self. He says that it really has no separate existence. It is the substratum of the other three. The other three are all expressions of it. It is the state which runs through them all and unites them all. He then puts it that the normal state of your consciousness must be molded. So what is the normal consciousness? And he suggests that you can choose to say, I am this body, motions, etc. But you can also choose to say, I am not just this body, I am more even than these acquisitions and deprivations. If this all sounds like it's becoming rather complicated, Professor Algeo then draws our attention to the fact that the acquisitions and deprivations, which you can see on your screen, in fact correlate to the 7 human principles as outlined by HPB. He clarifies the need to identify with who we really are in the upper triad, which is completed by the conception that I am space and time. Who am I? I am all space and unity. In relation to the deprivations, he says we can ask ourselves, if I am not these things, then what am I? At this juncture, it's as well to be reminded of HPB's 7 human principles, just briefly, to confirm Professor Algeo's statements on the correlations between these principles and the 7 parts to the acquisitions and deprivations, as seen in her diagram. He suggests that we do not identify with the principles of our lower nature in the lower quaternary. And so just to remind you, hopefully you've heard of them before, the lower quaternary includes the physical body, the life or vital principle known as prana, the astral body, and the animal soul, also known as kama rupa, which is the seat of animal passions and desires. And then we have the upper imperishable triad, which includes the dual principle of mind, upper and lower manas, upper and lower mind, the spiritual soul or buddhi, and spirit, which is atma. And you can find those in the Key to Theosophy. At this point, Professor Algeo concludes his talk without time to go into the details on the acquisitions and deprivations, perhaps leaving us to reflect and meditate on the meanings for ourselves to bring us individual understanding. The acquisitions, which are listed in the 3 columns, correspond to the upper triad of the 3 principles. So there we have the acquisitions at the top and the 3 parts across. And And we are now actually going to look at those because fortunately we have got time. So we will go through. There'll be a little bit more detail given on some of them than other parts, but nonetheless, we will go through them. So we have the first column on the acquisitions, which state, and before I say that, really what I should point out is that what HPB is actually saying is that through the process of concentration and meditation, these are the things which we acquire, which we will naturally acquire. They will come to us through the process of meditation. And similarly with the deprivations, the things that we would wish to shed, if you like, or to vanish, are the deprivations. And again, this will happen very naturally just through the process of meditation. So this is the whole point of the diagram. And all the acquisitions and deprivations in any of the statements on the diagram can be pondered, reflected on, contemplated on individually at any time. You could take one and just write it out, put it up on board for a week, if it really means something to you, and consider it. So if it looks a little bit overwhelming to see it all now, and I think a lot of people perhaps tend to shy away from it because of that, once you actually start to reflect on the statements, they are very enlightening, very inspiring, and help us to see why the meditation is so helpful in our lives. So that, first of all, we'll move then on to the first column. One of the things that will happen as we continue to meditate is we will experience perpetual presence in imagination in all space and time. Imagination is a word that comes from the Latin root imagen, which means in Latin to picture to oneself. The Sanskrit root for this is ti, which means and refers to meditation, understanding, reflection, religious thought, mind, design, intelligence, notion, and intellect. HPB says, and this comes to the second point on the left-hand column, from this originates a substratum of memory which does not cease in dreaming or waking. Its manifestation is courage, and this is one that especially jumped out for me. Interestingly, the etymology of the word courage comes from the Greek and Latin root cor, C-O-R, meaning heart, the innermost essence or part of anything. And of course, we have the word core spelled C-O-R-E in English for the core meaning of something. HPB significantly states that with memory of universality, all dread vanishes during the dangers and trials of life. So that's the third point in the first column. And I'll just read that again. With memory of universality, all dread vanishes during the dangers and trials of life. The Sanskrit word for memory is smriti, from the root smara, which means remembrance, reminiscence, thinking of, upon, calling to mind. Or it is said that we can reflect on dwelling in the memory of the innermost essence of our universal being, where dread of all the impending troubles that assail us in life disappear. So now we'll move on to the second column of acquisitions. And the first item or axiom states that the continued attempt at attitude of mind to all existing things, which is neither love, nor hate, nor indifference, different in external activity to each, because in each the capacity alters mentally, the same to all. So this change will just naturally take place. And we can reflect on that in our own lives. Equilibrium and constant calm, this is the third item. Greater ease in practicing the virtues, which are really the outcome of wisdom, for benevolence, sympathy, justice, etc., arise from the intuitive identification of the individual with others, although unknown to the personality. Equilibrium and inner calm are the natural state of wisdom, the outcome of which is a greater ease in reflecting the virtues through the intuitive identification of the individual with other individuals, which to the personality that is in the lower quaternary of the 7 principles is unknown. Personality cannot know them. It's only known through this link with the upper triad, or it's only revealed. The third column of the acquisitions says, the perception in all embodied beings of limitation only. HPB is stating that all beings are perceived as being in their limited embodied state and not who they really are. The last statement in the third column of acquisitions states, criticism without praise or blame. Vichara is a Sanskrit term that is translated as discernment. It is an essential element of dhyana meditation, both in the Buddhist and in the Hindu traditions, and describes the faculty of discrimination between right and wrong without judgment. As mentioned earlier on, the footnote beneath the 3 columns on acquisitions then states, acquisition is completed by the conception, I am all space and time. Beyond that, it cannot be said. So then we come to the next set of axioms and under the heading of deprivations. And here we see that we've got a total of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, but 2 of them are reduced down to 4. And this corresponds to the lower quaternary. So these are the elements in our makeup which will disappear with constant practice of meditation. So we've then come to the deprivations, which are divided, as I said, into the columns. This list is preceded by a heading stated that there needs to be a constant refusal to think of the reality of, and then she lists the things with which we cease to be attached to. And the first column of deprivations state separations and meetings, association with places, times and forms, futile longings, expectations, sad memories, and broken-heartedness. Second column of deprivation states losing the distinction between friends and foe, resulting in absence of anger and bias, replaced by judgment. The third and fourth columns are linked and state possessions and personality leading to vanity and remorse. They will vanish. And finally, in the fifth column, deprivations stating sensation leading to gluttony and lust, etc. Sensation comes from the Latin root to feel. The meaning of sensation is a physical feeling or perception resulting from something that happens to or from coming into contact with the body. In a footnote beneath the 5 columns, HBB states, these deprivations are produced by the perpetual imagination without self-delusion of I am without, the recognition of there being the source of bondage, ignorance, and strife. Deprivation is completed by the meditation, I am without attributes. So that in itself is a statement to reflect on. I am without attributes. In another footnote, HPB tells us, there is no risk of self-delusion if the personality is deliberately forgotten. And how is the personality deliberately forgotten? By concentrating on meditation, by concentrating on the divine. Not that you have to get rid of it. Finally, she comments in general note at the bottom of the diagram that all the passions and virtues interblend with each other. Therefore, the diagram gives only general hints. So it's literally what it is. It's a diagram to give us further ability to discriminate and to reflect on what is true. So in relation to the comment which Professor Algeo gave us from HPB early on in his talk, that I am the universe, but the universe is also in me, I'd like to recount a mystic experience which occurred in the forest of Gome in Tanzania to Dr. and DBE, that's Dame of the British Empire, Jane Goodall, who first came across and studied Theosophy when she was in her 20s. As it happens, she is not only the world's foremost expert on chimpanzees, but now in her 90s, is to this day still an active environmentalist and ecologist. She says that, lost in awe at the beauty around me, I must have slipped into a state of heightened awareness. It is hard, impossible really, to put into words the moment of truth that suddenly came upon me then. Even the mystics are unable to describe their brief flashes of spiritual ecstasy. It seemed to me, as I struggled afterwards to recall the experience, that the self was utterly absent. She means by that the lower self. I and the chimpanzees, the earth and trees and air, seemed to merge, to become one with the spirit power of life itself. The air was filled with a feathered symphony, the evensong of birds. I heard new frequencies in their music, and also in singing insects, voices, notes so high and sweet, I was amazed. Never had I been so intensely aware of the shape, the color of the individual leaves, the varied patterns of the veins that made up each one unique. Scents were clear as well, easily identifiable. Fermenting overripe fruit, waterlogged earth, cold wet bark, the damp odor of chimpanzee hair, and yes, my own too. And the aromatic scent of young crushed leaves was almost overpowering. That afternoon, it had been as though an unseen hand had drawn back a curtain, and for the briefest moment, I had seen through such a window. In a flash of outside, I had known timelessness and quiet ecstasy, sensed a truth of which mainstream science is merely a small fraction. And I knew that the revelation would be with me for the rest of my life, imperfectly remembered, yet always within. A source of strength on which I could draw when life seemed harsh or cruel or desperate. Out in the rainforest, you learn how everything is infinite, and how each different species, even though it may seem insignificant, has a role to play in the tapestry of life. Some of you may have already experienced a period of this timeless unity with all things that Dr. Goodall speaks of. All others may not. But whatever the case, Dr. Goodall's experience reminds us, and I quote from her, "Every single individual matters. Every single individual makes an impact on the planet. And every single day we have a choice as to what kind of difference we're going to make." In her foreword to the 2017 book, The Intelligence of the Cosmos by Erwin Lazio, a philosopher of science who advocates quantum consciousness theory, Dr. Goodall wrote, "We must accept that there is an intelligence driving this process of evolution, that the universe and life on Earth are inspired and informed by an unknown and unknowable creator, a supreme being, a great spiritual power." So how then do we recall this great spiritual power? As Plato expressed it, by the ardent tuning of the soul toward the divine, not to ask any particular good, as is the common meaning of prayer, but for good itself, for the universal supreme good of which we are a part on earth, and out of the essence of which we have all emerged. So I hope that the elements in this evening's talk will have helped you to remind yourselves of the whole point of meditation. But I'd like to return to the beginning again and ask what happens when the good intentions to meditate on unity for the sake of all seem to disappear beyond our reach as we are drawn back by our habitual routines. The simplest answer is by establishing new habits to supersede old ones. And here are 10 useful disciplines given by a monk named Swami Saurapriyananda to aid this process. 1. Meditate regularly, at least once a day. 2. Have fixed times to meditate, or as near as possible. 3. Have a fixed place to meditate, as much as you can. I wouldn't suggest meditating in a broom cupboard. 4. Avoid bad thoughts about anything. 5. Avoid bad company as much as possible. 6. Practice a little asceticism. So whatever form that might take, some form of good efforts. 7. Cultivate the vastness of infinity to move away from petty thoughts about anything. 8. Establish a yearning for unity with the higher self. 9. Spiritualize daily activities with small rituals, like lighting a candle, chanting, or sounding Om. 10. Seek good company in groups with spiritually minded people, and readings, and listening to the words of the wise. I would add one more, which is simply to spend more time in nature to help us connect with the divine. Lastly, let us listen to a set of instructions which can be found on the Theosophical Society of England and Wales website, and which will help us to align with the practice of meditation. And they suggest: sit comfortably, and if necessary, support your back so that your spine is in an upright position. 2, take a few slow, deep breaths so that you feel more relaxed. 3, close your eyes and slowly and gently breathe in and out. Breathe out from deep into your lower chest to make more room for new air to go in. 4, observe your thoughts and feelings gently and calmly and without strain. Just let them come and go. 5, if your attention wanders, gently bring it back again. 6, maintain easy, regular breathing and become aware of the sounds all around you. 7, let the peace of this stillness flow outwards from within you to your home, your office, your neighborhood, and beyond. 8, after an allotted period of time, gently open your eyes and take 3 or more slow, deep breaths. 9, when you are ready, get up and return to your daily activities, feeling peaceful and refreshed. There are many approaches to meditation. Some recommend gentle music, some reading spiritual verses before closing their eyes to reflect on their meaning. Others use visualization or try to concentrate their minds by looking at a candle flame or flower. You must decide for yourself which method suits you best. It will take several days or a few weeks or months for the mind and emotions to settle into routine. At first, the energy of our minds rushes here and there, with all sorts of thoughts intruding. So there can be a feeling of frustration or even failure. But this becomes recognizable as just the normal action of the mind in its everyday ebb and flow. It is natural to feel that we should be able to control our thoughts and tell our minds to be quiet. And when we find we can't, we might have a strong reaction. This is to be expected. But this phase will pass with practice and patience. Through gentle training, it is possible to bring the mind into a condition of peace and unity. Om Tat Sat. And that's the end of my talk. But I would just like to say that the diagram itself, you can see from what we read this evening, is very, very powerful. And I strongly recommend that in addition to any efforts we make to establish or re-establish meditation in our lives, that we refer to the diagram and reflect on the statements that are in it in conjunction with the other spiritual studies we might be making. I hope that helps you. So thank you very much.